My name is Emily Parker. I'm 37 years old, and until a few months ago, I believed my life was exactly where it was supposed to be. I lived in Austin, Texas, in a beautiful two-story white house with a wraparound porch, a towering oak tree in the front yard, and a small rose garden in the back. Those roses weren't just flowers. My mother planted them herself a few months before she passed away. The house wasn't simply property. It was my childhood. Every room held a memory. The kitchen where Mom taught me to bake apple pie. The staircase where Dad used to surprise me with birthday balloons. The living room where our family celebrated every Christmas. When my mother died 8 years ago, she left the house entirely to me. It was fully paid off. The deed listed only one owner, Emily Parker. 3 years later, I married Jason Parker. We met at a charity fundraiser in downtown Austin. Jason was charming, funny, and incredibly attentive. He remembered the smallest details about me. He brought me coffee before work. He surprised me with flowers for no reason. Everyone said I was lucky. For the first couple of years, I believed them. Then things slowly began to change. Jason started coming home later and later. Whenever his phone rang, he stepped outside to answer it. He became defensive whenever I asked about money. "There are problems at work," he'd say. "Don't worry about it." I wanted to believe him. Marriage is built on trust. At least, it's supposed to be. One Tuesday morning, everything changed. I collapsed at work. The next thing I remembered was waking up in St. David's Medical Center with doctors standing over me. I had a rare heart condition that required emergency surgery. The operation saved my life, but complications kept me in the hospital for nearly 6 weeks. During the first week, Jason visited every day. He held my hand. He kissed my forehead. He promised that everything at home was under control. Then, the visits became shorter. By the 3rd week, he came every other day. By the 5th week, sometimes he didn't come at all. Whenever I asked why, he smiled apologetically. A huge project just started at work. I'm doing everything I can. I felt guilty for questioning him. He was my husband. I trusted him completely. Finally, the day arrived. The doctors cleared me to go home. I couldn't wait. I dreamed about sleeping in my own bed, drinking coffee from my favorite blue mug, walking through Mom's rose garden. Jason promised he would pick me up. But an hour before I was discharged, he sent me a text message. "Emergency meeting. I'm so sorry. Take a taxi home. I'll meet you there. Love you." I was disappointed, but I understood, or at least, I thought I did. The taxi pulled into my neighborhood just after 3 o'clock. Something immediately felt wrong. There was a black minivan parked in my driveway. The curtains were different. Several of my mother's rose bushes had been removed. Maybe Jason was renovating. I tried to convince myself everything had a simple explanation. I paid the driver, grabbed my suitcase, and walked to the front door. I slipped my key into the lock. It wouldn't turn. I tried again. Nothing. Confused, I checked the house number. It was correct. This was my house. Before I could knock, the front door opened. A woman I had never seen before stood in the doorway. She looked to be in her early 40s. Behind her, 2 young children were sitting on the couch watching television. She smiled politely. "Can I help you?" I stared at her. "I think you're in the wrong house." She frowned. "I'm sorry. This is my home." Her expression immediately changed. "No, I don't think it is." I laughed nervously. "There must be some mistake. My name is Emily Parker. I own this house." The woman hesitated. Then she quietly said, "My husband and I bought this house 3 weeks ago." The world seemed to stop. "I'm sorry. What did you just say?" "We purchased it through a licensed real estate agency." She slowly reached for a folder sitting on a nearby table. "I have all the paperwork." She handed me the closing documents. At the top of the first page was my full legal name, Emily Parker. Near the bottom, a signature, my signature, except it wasn't mine. The sale price was listed as $850,000. I felt dizzy. I never signed this. The woman looked genuinely frightened. "My name is Jennifer Walker," she said softly. "We bought the house legally. My husband met both sellers." "Both sellers?" She nodded. "Your husband and you." I couldn't breathe. "I've never met you before today." Jennifer slowly took out her phone. The real estate agent took a picture after closing. She showed me the photograph. Jason stood smiling beside her. Next to him was a blonde woman wearing oversized sunglasses. She had signed the paperwork pretending to be me. Although most of her face was hidden, one thing caught my eye: the silver necklace around her neck. I knew that necklace. I had given it to Jason for our 5th wedding anniversary. He hadn't lost it. He had given it to another woman. With shaking hands, I called Jason. Straight to voicemail. I called again. His phone was turned off. Then I opened my banking app. Every account was empty. Our joint checking account, my personal savings, even the insurance payment I had received after my surgery. Everything gone. I stood on the front porch of the home where I had spent most of my life, but it was no longer mine. While I had been fighting to stay alive in a hospital bed, my own husband had stolen my future, and I had absolutely no idea how much worse this nightmare was about to become. I stood frozen on my own front porch. The closing documents shook in my hands. None of it felt real. Jennifer Walker looked just as overwhelmed as I was. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "If I'd known something was wrong, I never would have bought this house." I believed her. She wasn't my enemy. She had been deceived just like I had. She invited me inside while we waited for the police. Walking into the house felt like stepping into someone else's life. The walls had been repainted. My mother's antique dining table was gone. The family portraits that had hung in the hallway for years had disappeared. Even the old piano my father had restored for my mother was missing. I turned to Jennifer. "Where's the furniture?" She looked confused. The house was sold completely empty. Empty. Every piece of furniture, every family photograph, every keepsake from my parents, gone. It felt as if someone had erased my entire life. Less than an hour later, Detective Robert Hayes from the Austin Police Department arrived. He carefully examined the closing documents before asking me a single question. "Mrs. Parker, did you sign any legal paperwork while you were in the hospital?" "No." "Did you give your husband power of attorney?" "Never." He nodded. "Then someone committed a very sophisticated fraud." Jennifer handed Detective Hayes the business card of the real estate agent who handled the sale. His name was David Carter. Within 30 minutes, David arrived at the house. The moment he saw me, his face lost all color. I don't understand." "You were at the closing." "No," I said quietly. "I've never met you before today." David looked genuinely confused. "But I watched you sign every document." He unlocked his tablet and opened the closing photos. There she was, the blonde woman again, standing beside Jason, smiling, pretending to be me. She wore oversized sunglasses and a wide-brimmed hat that hid most of her face. But one detail caught my attention immediately. Around her neck hung a silver heart-shaped necklace. I felt sick. "I know that necklace." Detective Hayes looked at me. "Whose is it?" "I bought it for my husband on our 5th wedding anniversary." David frowned. "You mean—" "He gave it to another woman." David continued reviewing the paperwork. Everything appeared legitimate. My driver's license, my social security number, property records, even a notarized power of attorney authorizing Jason to complete the sale. It was almost perfect. Almost. Detective Hayes looked closely at the signatures. "They copied your handwriting well, but they made one mistake." He pointed toward the bottom of the page. "I noticed you signed your police statement with a long tail on the letter Y. This signature ends differently." It was subtle, almost impossible to notice, but it was enough. The signature had been forged. The detective immediately contacted the notary listed on the documents, Thomas Sullivan. By that evening, Thomas had been brought in for questioning. At first, he insisted everything was legitimate. I verified her identification. I watched her sign. I followed the law. Detective Hayes placed a thick medical file on the table. "Mr. Sullivan, on the exact day you claim Emily Parker signed these documents, she was recovering from open-heart surgery." He slid another document across the table. Hospital security logs, visitor records, nursing reports. Emily Parker had never left the hospital. Thomas stared silently at the paperwork. Sweat formed across his forehead. Finally, he lowered his head. "I made a mistake." Detective Hayes shook his head. "No. You committed a felony." Thomas closed his eyes. "Jason offered me $50,000. The room fell silent. He told me his wife was too sick to travel. He said she had authorized everything, and the woman who came with him used fake identification. "Who was she?" I asked. Thomas swallowed hard. "I don't know her real name." "Jason introduced her as his wife." Later that evening, I stayed at my best friend Ashley Brooks' apartment. Ashley hugged me the moment I walked through her door. "You can stay here as long as you need." I tried to smile, but I couldn't. Everything I owned was gone. My childhood photo albums, my parents' wedding pictures, my mother's handwritten recipes, the blanket my grandmother knitted before she died. None of it could ever be replaced. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m, I remembered something. Jason had once forgotten to remove one of his email accounts from our shared laptop. The password still worked. My heart pounded as I opened his inbox. Most of the messages had been deleted. But one conversation remained. It was with someone named Nicole Anderson. The subject line simply read, "Everything is ready." I opened the thread. Jason had written, "The house has been sold. The money is already in the account. Emily has no idea. We'll be in Miami before anyone realizes what's happened." Nicole replied only minutes later. "Good. I honestly thought she wasn't going to survive the surgery." My blood turned cold. I read the sentence again and again. Then another message appeared farther down. Jason had responded, "If she dies, everything becomes much easier." I couldn't breathe. This wasn't just fraud anymore. This wasn't just betrayal. My husband had been planning a future without me. The next morning, Detective Hayes called. "We found Jason's workplace." "What did they say?" "He resigned 2 weeks ago. They thought he accepted a new job in Florida. No forwarding address. No emergency contact. No trace." Before hanging up, the detective hesitated. There was one more thing. "What?" "The hospital reviewed surveillance footage. They found a woman visiting your room several times." I frowned. "I don't remember any visitors." "Neither do the nurses. The woman wasn't employed there. She was wearing stolen medical scrubs." My pulse quickened. "Was it Nicole?" "We believe so." The detective paused. "Emily, I think your husband planned this long before you ever went into surgery." As I lowered the phone, someone knocked on Ashley's apartment door. Neither of us was expecting anyone. Ashley looked through the peephole. Her face immediately turned white. She whispered, "Emily, you need to see this." Parked across the street was Jason's black SUV. But Jason wasn't alone. A blonde woman sat in the passenger seat. She was smiling, watching the apartment. They knew exactly where I was. Ashley pulled me away from the window. "Don't let them see you," she whispered. I stepped back into the hallway, my heart pounding. Jason's black SUV remained parked across the street. Nicole sat in the passenger seat, wearing oversized sunglasses. She looked relaxed, comfortable, as if she had every reason to believe she had already won. Detective Hayes arrived less than 10 minutes later, but by the time his patrol car turned onto the street, the SUV was gone. Detective Hayes immediately requested traffic camera footage from the surrounding intersections. Within an hour, investigators tracked the SUV to a hotel on the outskirts of Austin. By the time officers arrived, Jason and Nicole had already checked out, but they hadn't left empty-handed. The hotel manager handed Detective Hayes copies of their registration forms. They hadn't even used fake names. Jason Parker, Nicole Anderson. Detective Hayes looked at me. "They're getting careless." "Why?" "Because people who believe they're winning usually stop covering their tracks." Later that afternoon, I met with attorney Elizabeth Morgan, one of the best real estate fraud attorneys in Texas. She spent nearly 2 hours reviewing every document connected to the sale of my house. Finally, she closed the file. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. She looked directly at me. This was planned months in advance. "What makes you say that?" She spread several documents across her desk. The forged driver's license was created almost 5 months ago. The fake power of attorney was drafted 4 months ago. The property valuation was ordered 3 months ago. She pointed to another document. "And someone requested copies of your home's title records long before you were hospitalized." I felt sick. My surgery wasn't even scheduled back then. Elizabeth nodded slowly. "Exactly. They were preparing long before you became ill." That evening, Detective Hayes called again. "We've identified Nicole Anderson." "What did you find?" "She used to be a licensed real estate agent in Florida." "What happened?" "Her license was permanently revoked." "For what?" He paused. "Mortgage fraud?" I closed my eyes. Of course. Nicole already knew exactly how to manipulate property transactions. She wasn't helping Jason. She was teaching him. The next morning, another breakthrough came. Bank investigators traced the proceeds from my house sale. The $850,000 hadn't stayed in one account. It had been divided into 6 separate wire transfers. Some money went to Miami, some to the Cayman Islands, some to shell companies registered in Delaware. Elizabeth studied the financial records. "This is money laundering," Detective Hayes agreed. "And it's not their first time." He slid another folder across the table. Inside were photographs of 3 different women. "Do you recognize any of them?" I shook my head. "They're all previous victims." My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" Hayes opened the first file. Melissa Harper, a 63-year-old widow from Tampa. Her vacation home had been sold using forged documents. The second file, Angela Morris, divorced, recovering from cancer treatment. Her condominium had been refinanced without her knowledge. The third, Rebecca Collins, recently hospitalized after a serious car accident. Someone had attempted to transfer ownership of her property. The transfer failed only because the hospital required an in-person identity verification. I looked up slowly. This wasn't just about me. Hayes shook his head. "No. We believe Jason and Nicole have been targeting vulnerable homeowners for years." I couldn't stop thinking about one sentence from Nicole's email. I thought she wasn't going to survive the surgery. It haunted me. The next afternoon, Detective Hayes asked me to meet him at the hospital. Dr. Karen Whitfield, the chief cardiologist, joined us in a private conference room. She looked unusually serious. "We've completed an internal review." My heart raced. "What did you find?" She placed a laboratory report on the table. "One of your post-operative medications had been contaminated." I stared at the report. "What does that mean?" "It contained a drug that should never have been administered to a heart surgery patient." My hands began shaking. "Could it have killed me?" Dr. Whitfield answered quietly. "Yes. If the dosage had been slightly higher, you probably wouldn't have survived." The room fell silent. Detective Hayes leaned forward. "Hospital security footage shows Nicole entering your room wearing stolen medical scrubs." Dr. Whitfield nodded. The medication was replaced less than 20 minutes later. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Jason hadn't simply taken advantage of my illness. He had tried to make sure I never came home. That night, Ashley insisted I stay somewhere else. If they found me once, they could find me again. She was right. Detective Hayes arranged for me to stay in a secure hotel under police protection, around midnight. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered. For several seconds. No one spoke. Then I heard Jason's voice. "Emily." His tone was calm, almost gentle. "You should stop fighting." I gripped the phone tightly. "You sold my house. You stole my life. You tried to kill me." He sighed. "It doesn't have to end this way." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You still have a chance to walk away." "What?" "I'll wire you $200,000. You disappear. You never testify. And we both move on." I laughed bitterly. "You think you can buy my silence?" "No. I think you know what happens if you don't." A chill ran down my spine. "Is that a threat?" Jason didn't answer. Instead, he said one final sentence. "You should have stayed in the hospital." The line went dead. Detective Hayes immediately traced the call. It lasted only 43 seconds, but it was enough. The signal came from Miami, Florida. Jason and Nicole had finally made a mistake. Hayes looked at me with determination. "We know where they are now." Elizabeth Morgan closed her briefcase. "Then let's bring your house back and bring them to justice." For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. But none of us realized. Jason wasn't planning to run anymore. He was preparing one final move. And this time, he had nothing left to lose. 3 days later, I boarded a flight to Miami. I never imagined I would travel there to confront my own husband. Detective Robert Hayes sat across the aisle. Attorney Elizabeth Morgan reviewed legal documents beside me. Neither of us spoke much. We all knew this trip could decide everything. If Jason disappeared with the money, recovering my home would become far more complicated. The FBI had joined the investigation. Because the money had crossed state lines and moved through multiple shell companies, the case was no longer just local fraud. It had become a federal investigation. When we landed, federal agents were already waiting. Special Agent Daniel Ross spread photographs across a conference table. Jason and Nicole had rented a luxury penthouse overlooking Biscayne Bay. They had purchased a white Range Rover, designer watches, expensive jewelry, private club memberships. They were spending my money as if it had always belonged to them. Agent Ross looked at me. They're acting like people who believe they're untouchable. The following morning, agents began surveillance. For nearly 6 hours, nothing happened. Then, shortly after noon, Jason walked out of the building. For the first time since my surgery, I saw him in person. He looked relaxed. He laughed while talking on his phone. There wasn't a trace of guilt on his face. I couldn't understand how someone I had once loved could look so happy after destroying my life. Nicole joined him a few moments later. She wrapped her arm around his. The two of them kissed before getting into the SUV. Ashley, who had flown to Miami to support me, quietly squeezed my hand. "You deserve better than him." I nodded. "I know," but seeing it with my own eyes still hurt. The agents didn't arrest them immediately. Instead, they followed. Jason drove to an upscale office building in downtown Miami. According to Agent Ross, another property closing was scheduled that afternoon. Another victim, another stolen home. Elizabeth looked at me. "If we stop this closing, we may be able to prove they intended to keep committing these crimes." Inside the building, undercover federal agents blended in with the buyers, attorneys, and real estate staff. Everything was ready. The moment Jason attempted to complete the transaction, they would move in. At exactly 2:17 p.m., Jason entered the conference room. Nicole sat beside him, pretending to be another homeowner. The buyers smiled politely. The attorney began explaining the documents. Jason confidently slid a forged driver's license across the table. Then, he signed the victim's name. One signature, one lie, one more stolen life. Agent Ross spoke quietly into his radio. "Move." The conference room doors burst open. "Federal agents!" "Nobody move." Jason froze. Nicole dropped the pen onto the table. Within seconds, both were surrounded. Jason looked directly at me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he smiled. "I knew you'd come." I stared at him. "You tried to kill me." He shrugged. "You survived. As you can see." The agents handcuffed him. Yet somehow, he still looked confident, almost amused. That frightened me more than anything. 2 months later, the trial began in Austin. Television cameras lined the courthouse steps. Reporters called it one of the largest real estate fraud cases in Texas. Inside the courtroom, Jason pleaded not guilty. His defense attorney argued that I had willingly agreed to sell the house. He claimed our marriage had been falling apart. He even suggested I had forgotten signing the documents because of medication after surgery. Listening to those lies made me furious. Elizabeth calmly stood. "The evidence will speak for itself." One by one, witnesses testified. Jennifer Walker explained how she had unknowingly purchased the house. David Carter admitted he had been deceived by forged identification. Thomas Sullivan confessed to accepting a $50,000 bribe. Dr. Karen Whitfield testified that someone had tampered with my medication. The prosecution's case was becoming overwhelming, but Jason remained strangely calm, as if he still expected something to save him. Then the courtroom doors opened. A woman walked inside. I had never seen her before. She looked to be around 60 years old. Gray hair, simple blue dress, nervous expression. Elizabeth smiled slightly. "I'd like to call Margaret Collins to the stand." Jason's face changed instantly. For the first time, he looked afraid. Margaret sat down and slowly raised her right hand to take the oath. The prosecutor asked softly, "Mrs. Collins, how do you know Jason Parker?" She swallowed hard. "I'm his mother." The courtroom fell silent. Jason closed his eyes. He already knew what was coming. Margaret began crying. "I can't stay silent anymore. I raised my son, to be honest. But somewhere along the way, I lost him." She reached into her purse and removed a small flash drive. "I found this hidden inside Jason's old desk." The courtroom technician connected it to the screen. A video began playing. Jason and Nicole sat together inside a hotel room. Neither of them realized the laptop camera had been recording. Nicole laughed. "Once Emily's surgery is over," Jason interrupted, "if she doesn't survive, everything becomes much easier." Nicole smiled. "And if she does?" Jason leaned back. Then we'll make sure she stays in the hospital long enough." My heart stopped. The recording continued. Jason held up the forged property documents. "By the time she gets home, the house won't belong to her anymore." The courtroom was completely silent. Even Jason's attorney lowered his head. Margaret wiped away her tears. "I loved my son, but I couldn't let him destroy another innocent person's life." Jason slowly turned toward his mother. "You betrayed me." Margaret looked at him with tears in her eyes. "No, I finally chose the truth." The judge ordered a recess. As everyone stood, Elizabeth leaned toward me. "We've won." I wanted to believe her, but Jason wasn't finished. As deputies escorted him from the courtroom, he looked back at me one last time. Then he smiled. Not a frightened smile, not an angry smile, a confident one. Later that afternoon, Detective Hayes rushed into the courthouse hallway. His face was pale. "Emily, what happened?" "Someone broke into your house." I felt my stomach drop. "My house?" Hayes nodded. "They weren't looking for money. They searched every room." Elizabeth frowned. What were they trying to find? Hayes held up a small evidence bag. Inside was a burned photograph that officers had recovered from the fireplace. On the back, barely visible beneath the smoke stains, were 5 handwritten words. The original deed, never burned. I stared at the photograph. "What does that mean?" Hayes looked directly at me. "I think your mother hid something. And whatever it is." Jason believed it could still destroy the entire case. I couldn't stop thinking about the words written on the back of that burned photograph. The original deed never burned. My mother had written those words years before she died. But why? And what had Jason been searching for? The next morning, Detective Hayes, Attorney Elizabeth Morgan, and I returned to my house. Police officers had already finished processing the crime scene. The house looked untouched. No expensive electronics had been stolen. No jewelry was missing. Every drawer, every cabinet, every bookshelf had simply been searched. Jason hadn't been looking for valuables. He'd been looking for one specific thing. Elizabeth stood quietly in the living room. "Think like your mother. Where would she hide something important?" I closed my eyes. Then I remembered. When I was a little girl, Mom always told me, the safest place isn't where people look first. It's where they never think to look. Suddenly, I knew. The rose garden. I ran into the backyard. Most of the bushes had been damaged during the sale preparations, but one corner remained untouched, the oldest white rose bush, the one Mom loved the most. I knelt beside it and began digging with my hands. After only a few minutes, my fingers struck metal, a small waterproof box. Detective Hayes carefully opened it. Inside were several sealed envelopes, a flash drive, and one original property deed, still bearing my mother's signature, still showing me as the sole legal owner. Elizabeth smiled. "This changes everything." Back at the courthouse, forensic specialists examined the flash drive. It contained hundreds of scanned documents, bank statements, emails, wire transfers, hidden contracts. Jason had secretly borrowed money against properties he never owned. Nicole had created dozens of fake identities, but the biggest discovery came from one short video file. It had been recorded by my mother's old home security camera years earlier. The timestamp was nearly 2 years before her death. The video showed Jason sitting at our kitchen table. My mother stood across from him. "You'll never convince Emily to sell this house," Mom said. Jason smiled. "I don't need her to sell it." "What do you mean?" "One day, I'll own it anyway." The video ended. Detective Hayes looked at me. "He planned this before he even married you." I felt tears running down my face. Had he ever loved me, or had he only loved the house? The trial resumed the following week. This time, the prosecution presented the newly discovered evidence. The original deed, the hidden financial records, the security video, every piece destroyed Jason's defense. His attorney quietly stood. "Your Honor, my client wishes to change his plea." The judge looked directly at Jason. "Mr. Parker?" Jason slowly stood. His shoulders had fallen. The confidence was gone. "I plead guilty." The courtroom became silent. The judge asked, "To all charges?" Jason closed his eyes. "Yes." Nicole entered a guilty plea as well. Both admitted to conspiracy, fraud, forgery, money laundering, attempted murder, and organized real estate theft. 1 month later, The courtroom was filled again for sentencing. Judge Eleanor Brooks looked directly at Jason. "Mr. Parker, you betrayed the one person who trusted you completely. You forged documents. You stole property. You attempted to profit from your wife's medical crisis. And according to overwhelming evidence, you were willing to let her die." She paused. "For these crimes, I sentence you to 30 years in federal prison." Jason lowered his head. Then the judge turned toward Nicole. "Ms. Anderson, you abused your professional knowledge to exploit vulnerable homeowners across multiple states. You are sentenced to 22 years in federal prison." Neither of them spoke, as federal marshals led them away. Jason looked back at me one final time. His eyes searched mine, perhaps hoping for forgiveness. I simply nodded, not because I forgave him, but because I no longer carried his guilt. It belonged to him. Several weeks later, the court officially declared the sale of my house legally void. Jennifer Walker and her family received full compensation through the court and the Federal Victims Restitution Fund. Before moving out, Jennifer hugged me. "I'm so glad you got your home back." "I'm sorry this happened to you," I smiled. "It happened to both of us." She smiled through tears. Then she handed me a small flower pot. "We planted this for your garden." Inside was a young white rose. The day I walked back into my home, I carried only one small suitcase. Everything else had been lost forever. Family photographs, old letters, my father's watch, my grandmother's quilt. Some things could never be replaced. But the house was finally home again. I unlocked the front door. This time, the key turned easily. Sunlight poured through the living room windows. The rooms were empty, quiet, peaceful. I walked slowly into the kitchen, placed my hand on the countertop, and cried, not because I was broken, but because I had survived. Over the next year, I rebuilt my life. I restored my mother's rose garden. I adopted a golden retriever puppy and named him Oliver. I returned to work, and with attorney Elizabeth Morgan's help, I established the Rose Parker Foundation. The foundation provides legal assistance, temporary housing, and financial counseling for victims of real estate fraud and financial abuse. Every family we helped reminded me why I had refused to give up one rainy afternoon. A letter arrived from federal prison. The sender, Jason Parker. I stared at the envelope for several minutes before opening it. Inside was a single handwritten page. "Emily, I spent years convincing myself that money would make me happy. Instead, it cost me everything. I don't expect forgiveness. I only hope you find peace." There were no excuses, no blame, no manipulation. For the first time, he had accepted responsibility. I quietly folded the letter, walked to the fireplace, and placed it into the flames. Some chapters deserve one final sentence. Then they deserve to end. People often ask me whether I still believe in trust. My answer surprises them. Yes. Because one dishonest person should never convince you that everyone is dishonest. Jason stole my home. He emptied my bank accounts. He tried to erase my future, but he failed, because a home is more than walls and windows. A home is built by truth, by love, by memories that no thief can ever steal. He secretly sold my house while I was lying in a hospital bed, but in the end, he lost everything he tried to take from me, and I finally came home.